All right, good morning, everyone. That is very loud. Okay, my name is Kat Riley. Nice to see you all. I am your moderator this morning. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with CAEH. And we'll start off with a land acknowledgement today. The city of Halifax is situated in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. Welcome to this session. Today's session is System Transformation and Performance Management. System leaders are responsible for ensuring system oversight and system improvement. We'll hear from Edmonton's experience with system-level performance management and how Red Deer became more intentional in selecting key stakeholders for decision-making roles, helping to create more impactful and sustainable solutions. So we are going to hear two presentations today. First up, we have Jackie Liu from Homeward Trust with the presentation Building Agile Foundations for Effective Systems-Level Performance Management in Addressing Homelessness. And after that, we'll hear from Ryan Veldkamp from the City of Red Deer on Empowering Change, Unleashing the Potential of Integrated Governance. So each presenter will have about 30 minutes, and we will have time for questions afterward. We're going to ask folks to hold their questions until the end of both presentations, and then you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of either. So without further ado, Jackie.
Morning. Okay, sweet. This is good. This will be the best breakout session that you've seen at Canadian Alliance yet, so it's a good way to start. Okay, so right on. So thanks for coming. I was hoping that I don't know what I was hoping, because you go to these things and you're like, is it good to have a lot of people? And then, you get nervous. And I see friends in the room, which is cool, but then it would also be good if this goes poorly that no one remembers me. So we'll kind of see how this goes. So my presentation is on agile systems. I'll talk a little bit about the Edmonton context, how we've adapted our approach to looking at the homeless serving system, the mechanism for how we've arrived at some of these changes, and we'll intersperse throughout. So we can do the questions at the end. If you're horribly confused or upset, just yell. I know that's okay, and we can address those things as we go. I don't want you to hold it in for another hour and ruin Ryan's presentation. So our land acknowledgement, Edmonton is situated on Treaty 6. I think we started being very deliberate at Homeward Trust to not read land acknowledgements, and so I will not do so. It's on the screen. I think it's important to recognize, I guess myself as an immigrant and a settler to the area, that I benefit from the land and the resources that have been traditionally the territories of our Indigenous population. So I'm grateful for that, and yeah. So bad hair day, sorry. So I'm Jackie Liu. This is my cousin. So I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Homeward Trust. It's good, right? It's got a body like mine. I should move on. So Homeward Trust is just as a bit of an introduction. So Homeward Trust is the community-based organization or the community entity for the city of Edmonton. We're the homeless system planner, and I guess just to situate the room, are there other community entities in the room? Who's in the room? So, okay, there's some peers, I guess. Frontline service providers. Cool. And the rest of you are politicians? Friends, future friends. So Homeward Trust is a homeless system planner for the city of Edmonton. We do lots of things. I won't go into them all. I guess it's as a broad overview, we coalesce the three funding streams across three levels of government to invest in program investments and to understand and plan out the homeless serving system. So Homeward Trust started in, is audio good? Yeah. Okay. Homeward Trust started its work in about 2008. Things have gone, things have progressed. So earlier in 2010, we had about 35 programs. The staff count, which I was not part of at the time, I think we had about 20 people. And currently, as of today, we have 100 programs. I guess we've called them interventions here, but programs, funding arrangements amongst approximately 30 partners. So quite a bit of activity. We've seen 16,000 housings since the start of Housing First, and 1,800 unique individuals are currently supported by programs across all of our streams. So we do a fair amount. So just to situate kind of where we are right now. So looking at the homeless serving system, this is our infrastructure framework. So to talk a little bit about the homeless serving system, one of the value adds that we have is the data backbone, right? So the homeless serving system, one of the things, if everyone works in silos, it doesn't work. So for us, we have a data backbone built on ETO. Does everyone, or do people know ETO? We love ETO? No. So ETO is our homeless information management system. It's essentially our database system that all our funded agencies use for case management. We use it for coordinated access, and it is the vital backbone. Is that a fair way to say it? It's a vital backbone, and it's kind of like a arthritic vertebral structure that's cracking a little bit, but we love it and we use it all the same. So we have ETO. All of our 100 programs use ETO. All of the information is aggregated by our team, and this process kind of shows the aggregation of how the data moves from 100 agencies into what's essentially our public-facing data. So one of the functions of the homeless serving system is to publicize the data, make sure that we can be responsive to it, and and publicize it so that people in the general public can really utilize and understand what's happening in the homeless serving sector. So this is the process we currently go through right now. The result is we have these public-facing dashboards. So if you go to the Homeless Trust website, you'll see these dashboards. So these are the 4 of them that we currently have right now, and they're okay. They're not bad, right? I don't know if anyone's seen them. We have some Edmonton people around. So basically, this is the current look of our homeless serving system. So the dashboard on the screen shows the people that are currently experiencing homelessness, broken out into categories of unsheltered, provisionally homeless, terms that I assume most folks have heard and are familiar with. So this is what it currently looks like on the public side. And when we're speaking to media, when we're looking at government funders, everyone goes to this, and this is our source of truth. Internally, to answer questions, this is the process that maybe we could improve a bit. So right now, we solve these. We have these things called dashboards. We utilize Tableau, and I should clarify, I'm not a data scientist, so I use these nouns, but I don't really know what they mean. It's kind of like grade 7 French. You can speak the words, but you don't really know. So we have these dashboards, right? And so every time I ask the data team a question, they make a dashboard. So that's what we have. So we have 115 dashboards, which I think is a lot. Like, relatively speaking, I don't know the right amount of dashboards, but that's a lot. So it's tough, and I don't make fun of my data team. I told them not to show up here. They're elsewhere in the building right now. It's wonderful to have a team that's responsive to information. It's not awesome that every time you ask a question, they make a new product. So we should do something about it. So Agile. So first, I guess we should talk a little bit about how Edmonton has shifted, not just the data itself, but how has Edmonton shifted. And when we're talking about Agile, it's how we ought to work day to day and how we adapt our processes, but also not being so insular as to assume that the work that we're making is our world. So talking a little bit about Edmonton, and I think you'll hear these themes throughout the conversation. We heard them last year, certainly, in Toronto at the last conference, but things are not the same as they were. And so when we're talking about community plans and homelessness, a lot of things have changed since the first few plans. And so, as a broad statement, I think the community plans used to be, if we did this, we could solve homelessness. And now the adaptation is, if we did our part and understood that everyone else has their part, we will make some progress. And that's the adaptation over time. And so those are things, that are on the screen. Again, I think you can read as well as I do. But in terms of economics, COVID, drug poisonings, all of those things have really shifted our landscape, and we need to be responsive to those things. So one of the things that we've really tried to put an emphasis on is not necessarily just the numbers of people who are experiencing homelessness. The homeless serving sector, I guess, is one of those sectors that you're very much judged by what you're not doing versus what you do, right? So I have a healthcare background. Most of my friends are in healthcare. Very few physicians get crapped on when the emergency room is full the next day. Very few teachers get in trouble because their classrooms are full the next year. But yet the people in this room can house tens of thousands of people and yet still be held accountable to the tent that's currently outside. So it's really important to understand the inflow and outflow. And so our new visualization and our new way of looking at things will clearly articulate what is the pressure entering the system and what's the outflow leaving. So it's really important to situate sort of our role within all of that work. Understanding as well that we're a really tiny part of the constellation, and it's awesome to be in a room with experts and professionals, and also understand that we are just like a tiny little speck, amongst the whole social network that really solves homelessness or addresses homelessness. And it's not to make us feel less important. Like, obviously we're here and we're proud of our work, but it's also really important to know like where we stand in amongst health, justice, economics, policy, right? We're not every part of the system. How am I doing? All right? Like, validate me. Come on. Okay. So a little bit of background on Edmonton itself. So a relatively high amount of people in Edmonton are in core housing need. I mean, these are the numbers that are really going to dictate our inflow and the pressures in our housing system over time. So geographical map showing core housing need. There's probably similar maps, I guess they're heat maps, I suppose, of major centers throughout the country. And we can kind of see like where are the concentrations. This might help us, for example, plan future services. It might help us to plan, future diversionary tactics. And I guess in addition to planning, it is just helpful to situate that information. Really very significant, pressures have been shown. So 4,710 households are in deep housing inequity. So there's around 50,000 households in Edmonton in core housing needs. So defined as the traditional core housing need of a greater than 30% of their income allocated to housing. There's just under 5,000 that are in that position earning an income of under $20,000, and that is not a great number to be earning when the average rent for a bachelor suite is just under $900. So those are the numbers that are really important to understand. And when we say things like housing is a core human right, there's an opposing pressure of affordability. And it's not an excuse, it's information to be used. And these are the things that will really situate ourselves within our system. So, yeah. Where do I have this? Oh, I'm sorry. We don't necessarily have these numbers. The bar graph below kind of shows our average square footage rent. I guess our recent data shows that the average rent for a bachelor suite apartment is just under $900. The average rent for a one bedroom is, I think it's $1,070. A two bedroom is about another $150 on top of that. So depending on the type of housing you're really looking for, it's not awesome. We've also shown over the last few years a very significant bottleneck in the time to housing. So the time to housing being the time that we define in Edmonton as the time to housing is when an individual is picked up by Housing First Team. So when their case file is picked up by a team in the community, from the moment that they meet each other till the moment that a lease is signed. We've seen very significant delays. We used to have about 60% of people moving into housing in 45 days. We're now up to 60. It's actually a little higher than that as of today. I think we're sitting at about 64, 65% right now. So about 2/3 of people take a month and a half to find housing. So when we're answering the question in community of, there's so many people in shelters, there's so many people in tents, they are possibly, very possibly, at some stage of the housing journey, but it has slowed over time. And of the frontline providers in the room, I think you can probably speak firsthand of the pressures of finding landlords, finding appropriate housing. And so it's a really, really important factor to play into of why aren't you solving the problem? Well, the problem is shifting. Other sort of notable points in Edmonton are emergency shelters. I don't see Edmonton shelter providers here, but we've gone, Edmonton has a fluctuation, I suppose, from summer to winter. We have on average somewhere between 800 to, it'll spike up to 12 or 1,300 beds during summer and winter. Traditionally, I mean pre-COVID, The fill rates have been at about 75%. So traditionally, shelters stay empty or stay full. Is there a half full, half empty with shelters? I don't know what the right language is, but shelters are about 75% utilized pre-COVID up until this year. This year, starting in about April, the shelter fill rates have been at almost 100%. So that's not great, right? Shelter concentration in amongst all the human rights and comfort literally just means as well that there's less room to work. So not so great, right? That's not a good trend. We have a very high incidence of opioid and synthetic drug use. I assume that's shared by most people in the audience. And not only is that a strain on resources, staff burnout, and the work, we have no idea what the effects of resuscitation are, right? And so, again, coming from a healthcare background, after you do CPR on a person, that person's not the same. And, the consequences of, recurring poisoning reversals, are to be determined, right? And so that will show an increase. We will likely see an increase in complexity over time. Hidden homelessness, I think this will come up as a theme again, but one of the epiphanies of COVID is that many of the mechanisms that kept people safe, so sleep or, couch surfing, having a roommate or whatever, really became illegal during COVID. And so as people were unable to utilize those networks, to reestablish them and to find that security again has been very challenging. And I put it at the bottom not as an afterthought, but as the perpetual pressure of Indigenous homelessness, houselessness, always being a factor. So there's lots of things that have shifted so in Edmonton, our last update to the community plan was in 2017. From 2017 until today, we've had a very significant change in our situation. Is that fair for people in the room? Things are not the same as they were. So what do we do about it? So systems planning framework. So one of the things that's happened during COVID, and I think as homeless serving systems and nonprofits and policy shifts, is that programs just happen, right? Things happen in response, things happen to added funding opportunities or grants, and so things just happen. And that's great, right? Things are responsive, but what happens is as we have a myriad of programs and systems across, they don't all link to each other. And so one of the things that we tried to do this year is actually try to situate, like, what are all of the programs in our community, and to add them into an ontology that actually makes sense and we can justify them and place them within outcomes. So this is our current structure. So of all of the programs we have, there's 79 listed. I know I said 100 before. There's some miscellaneous funding programs that aren't on here, so I'm not lying. Trying to situate all of our programs within the appropriate program types so that we can understand them in a different way. Right? Don't take a picture. Take a picture of this one. Right? So within the programs themselves, there's different breakdowns. And I show this is not necessarily important information for anybody, but it's important to understand the complexity and the differences in programs, but also how they're all related. So what are the different types of supportive housing? And we can talk about that if you want, but there's another presentation that our Director of Supportive Housing is doing. But what are all these programs? How do they move people out of homelessness? What supports do they provide? It's important to understand how the programs interrelate with each other and what are the solutions they're meant to provide. So that's the system, right? So trying to define, understand the system, understanding the situation, understanding our own system will give us a new set of insights. And how do we do that? This was I feel like I have to talk about this because we put it in the introduction. And so with the help of HelpSeeker Technologies, which HelpSeeker has a booth, what number is it? 15 or 16? Yeah. It's a good-looking bald guy there who's not me. So we've been working with HelpSeeker over the past year to refine our data timelines, our data processes. And one of the tools that they've introduced us to is Agile methodology. And is there anyone in the room familiar with Agile? One person? Okay, it's good. So no one will correct me, right? So Agile, this is my interpretation of Agile. And Alina Turner's sitting in the room. Alina's the one that taught us. Alina's going to hear my interpretation of Agile. And it's not, again, and these, I think you can look up Agile resources, so, please don't take them at face value. But my interpretation of Agile is very helpful for the homeless serving sector. Agile, I understand, is meant to be used for software developers, things that turn around quickly, products and projects that can be delegated and tied off really quickly. So what Agile's really allowed us to do is that it's allowed us to delegate work appropriately to team members. It's allowed them the authority or the courage to really say to me, you're holding me up. It's allowed them the ability to say, you know what, if we had this, we could do that, right? And it's allowed it in a very objective, reproducible way that's built around processes and daily routine. And it's really helpful, right? It concentrates on it concentrates on processes versus tools. It concentrates on collaboration, how we work together versus the ways that we're holding each other up. And it allows, I think most importantly, it allows for real-time adaptation. So when things come up that we don't understand, we actually say that we don't understand them and we address them together. These are the values, I guess, that we've used, concentrating very much on openness and courage, right? The ability to say, like, this is holding me up, I don't understand this, and actually having the accountability both to deliver the product from our staff and my accountability to them to provide them with solutions and technologies that they need to actually do their work. So I get conscious when people take pictures, like, everyone good? Okay. And I think the slides are posted somewhere too. Right, and then just to describe to you how that process actually works. So the positions, I suppose, that we've assigned, we have owners of projects, we have the team, and we have the Scrum Master. So our Scrum Master is our manager of data and analytics. His name is Alan. So he'll take the team through a 2-week sprint. I'll show you an example of a sprint on the next slide, but basically this is how it works. There's 2-week sprints, projects are identified, the owners are, so they get the people who they're accountable to, the delegated team that does the projects are assigned to, and we actually talk about them every single day. So it involves a daily quick huddle, it involves a longer sprint planning session, and it really allows us to prioritize, deprioritize, and move things along. We identify, there's nouns that are important, like blockers, right? So we identify blockers, who's standing right here. So we allow the team to speak openly, and it repeats. And we're currently on sprint. We're about to enter sprint 16, and this is an example of how this works. So there's a number of us in the room, I guess. And so this is a sprint from our last October session. You'll notice things on there like there's an Arch project that we're currently planning on. We're working on dashboard updates, and they're all perpetual real-time reporting and things that are not. It's not so much as creating a final thing to be put up for approval, but rather the team showing each other and then our leadership, here are all the interdependent steps and and each of the barriers and successes as they go along. Any questions or thoughts about this? I don't know if I can ask that, or we can come back to it. But the end result, or I guess the current result, is from the original slide I showed you with the interdependent things. We had a system based on SPSS, utilizing 6,000 lines of code that I had to ask questions, and a dashboard would be made every time we had a question, to a much more streamlined data system running through Python. It's much cleaner. We've got the ability to ask questions of that data set, and the turnaround time should be quite remarkable. So again, I don't speak this language. This slide was made by Alan. It makes sense to him. I hope it makes sense to you. But the tangible thing for me is I can get answers to questions I want hourly, or within a couple hours, and I'm not waiting for a dashboard or some product to be made a couple days down the line. So that's the tangible benefit to me, and if you have questions, Alina's also in the room. She can help me out. Okay, so future state. So this is the exciting stuff. This is the stuff that I don't think it's almost there. Like, we're waiting for it. It's gonna be so awesome. The future state, the state of homelessness. So shifting even our language, like language matters, right? And so if we're talking about things like the by name list, people who are experiencing homelessness, that's one output. But it's actually more important to understand that number within the state of homelessness overall, and that's I think that is our goal. Not just to look at the widgets that we're pushing through, but to understand how all of our activities interplay within the larger system. So our future dashboards. This is an example of what it might look like, but really situating not just the number of people housed, not just the number of people who are provisionally housed, but looking at that number in the context of the time to housing. We can sort of heat map activity over periods of time. We can compare the activity of the month versus that of the year. We can contrast that to, I guess, any number of system metrics that we still have to determine. But it would be interesting, for example, to contrast time to housing with average rents over a period of months. It would be interesting to look at negative exits compared to EMS calls or overdose reversals, right? There's all sorts of potential for things that we could do just by situating our data within the larger system as a whole. So this isn't ready, but the ability to do this work is really exciting. And it really just takes it away from, that rote, we had this many housings, or we did so many things, to we did so many things in amidst all of this other context. And that's, pretty excited about that. The other thing that we're really excited for are our team dashboards. And I know the graphics are not particularly easy to see, but one of the things that I think Home Trust has traditionally failed at is we provide information to our funded agencies on a monthly or quarterly basis. And that's okay. I mean, it's not bad, right? It's good to know how you're doing. But really, for continuous improvement, you have to democratize the data. And so one of the things that we're trying to establish are team-based dashboards. So a way for our funded agencies to access relevant team-based metrics for themselves at any time so that they can know how are they doing, how do they need to adapt their activities to the changing situation. And what we'd like to do, and we're still developing, is, what are the relevant metrics? So are the metrics for a supportive housing site, so Edmonton, we have congregate supportive housing sites. I know we define it differently in different parts. So, are a supportive housing site the same metrics as that of a housing first team that works in the community versus an outreach team that works in encampments? And the answer is, of course, they're very different, right? And so if we can develop those things to make relevant pieces of information available to the team, we hope that will help them do their work. So lots of exciting things there. Speaking of slides I don't understand, the math and science behind predictive modeling. Now, I will assume that everyone here is a veteran and an expert in the homeless serving system, and I think that the gut hunch of most people is generally pretty good. In the community, you can generally predict, we probably need, based on the situation, X number of supportive housing beds. Right, you can probably predict that. You can probably predict based on your inflow and the number of people currently in your caseload. You can probably predict the number of housing teams you need. This is an example of some of the math, I guess, behind some of our predictive modeling, again, to be developed, but looking at things that inform that gut hunch. So looking at things like your houselessness rate, your length of homelessness, shelter occupancy, trying to use all those metrics together to actually predict what might we need in the future, and we can adapt that for whichever of our component parts it is. Also, this is the thing that we're excited about, is the ability to use AI-enabled reporting. So going back to our current process of making dashboards and then interpreting those dashboards and then writing a briefing note and then trying to answer a question that by the time you've done all that stuff, the question has probably shifted because someone's moved on. The ability to utilize technology to look at those data insights in all of our systems to generate reports that, probably need a bit of work because they're made by a robot, right? They're not made by, a person with understanding, but having a really solid foundation to start on so that we can immediately answer questions is really exciting. So example on the screen, and I know it's not legible, I guess wherever you're sitting, but the exciting thing with this encampment report is looking at inflow and outflow from encampments, looking at what predictive factors might be and how housing activity has changed in encampments over time. So the ability to have that kind of insight available is amazing. Another example is, a briefing note made from unsheltered housing efforts. So all of this is in response to obviously the rising encampments, in the city of Edmonton, and it talks about different types of responses that are also part of the housing. Different types of responses that are not exactly housing outcomes, but that are related. So. Oh, sorry. What did I do there? Oh, the graphic got messed up. And sorry, and this last snapshot is of a review of sort of the current drug status. So looking at current drugs of abuse, it's not just fentanyl. We're talking a lot about stimulants, xylazine, a lot of crystal meth, things that don't necessarily have reversal therapies or opioid agonist therapies, and it's not necessarily listing things to have a solution, but rather listing things so that we understand that there are things we don't understand and what future predictive or future program needs might be in the future. So yeah. So that's the end of the presentation. I realized I didn't have like a great closing slide or anything, but I think our world is relatively exciting. We're going to go from like a self-service kind of answering questions as they come, just very, very inwards facing, like how many things do we produce? And we'll shift that, we're gradually shifting that to situating our information in amongst the large system as a whole, and then hopefully being very, very quick about it. So, there you go, thank you. Are you good? Okay. You're able to just.
All right, thanks again, Jackie. And now we will move over to Ryan's presentation, Empowering Change, Unleashing the Potential of Integrated Governance.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Veldkamp. I am the Superintendent of Social Wellness and Integration Supports for the City of Red Deer. And a self-proclaimed policy nerd, and I think you'll see that through and through as we go through and review the changes that Red Deer's made relative to our governance structure for supporting our homelessness support system as a whole. So a little bit about what we hope to accomplish today. Hopefully today you'll gain an understanding of the significance of integrated governance in addressing homelessness, and learn how we as the City of Red Deer became more intentional about who we have around as key stakeholders around the table, making decisions and helping create more impactful and sustainable solutions. So we have a number of policy documents for the City of Red Deer, and one of our key documents is the Social Policy Framework. So the Social Policy Framework outlines all of our key goals as a community, one of which is housing. And this is our kind of North Star relative to our housing goal. Safe, accessible, and affordable housing is available to all, and everyone is appropriately housed. Also in the Social Policy Framework, we talk about what role is the City of Red Deer going to play. So we talk about primary, shared, or complementary roles, and we look at what role is appropriate for the City of Red Deer. So, excuse me, specifically for the City of Red Deer, we looked at our role in housing as a shared role. We understood that there are other levels of government involved, as well as other local service providers and systems that provide critical roles, and I know Jackie talked about that we also need to rely on other systems to play their role. And this included the city's legislated role as the community entity for Reaching Home and the community-based organization for the Provincial Outreach and Support Services Initiative. So in 2019, our City Council appointed an ad hoc committee to review Red Deer's initial 10-year plan to end homelessness. That was originally started in 2018 and in 2008. And the work on that started in the latter part of 2008 with Everyone's Home, Red Deer's vision and framework for ending homelessness by 2018. We had two primary goals with our community housing and homelessness integrated plan. The first was understanding what actually happened in that first 10 years. So what was accomplished, what worked well, what didn't work well, what changed over that period of time. And then we also wanted to look at where are we going in the future. So that same ad hoc committee was tasked with providing us the future direction for the city of Red Deer and understanding how we move forward. One of the impactful pieces was when City Council appointed this ad hoc committee. They appointed individuals from all over the community. So we had service providers, housing management bodies, business representatives, local Indigenous knowledge keepers, and the faith community, amongst others, around the table. So what they came up with were five key priorities, and each priority had outlined actions that the City of Red Deer and its partners could action and take further important housing and homelessness work across the full housing continuum. So today I'm going to focus primarily on priority number 5, the communication and leadership, but we'll also touch a bit on priority number 2 and some actions that were subsequent to truth and reconciliation within governance. So communication and leadership, 2 of the primary goals within, or tasks within that goal, were looking at how the city looks at increasing collaboration and optimizing the resources available. I think one of the key things that we identified through this process is overall the City of Red Deer's social safety net is a broad investment of about $530 million. About half of that is health dollars directly. And when we look at the actual dollars invested into the homelessness support system, it was about 1% of those resources. So we can optimize those resources till we're blue in the face, but we're only going to be so impactful with that. So we looked at how do we engage other players within the system, and more importantly, how do we also engage with individuals with lived experience of homelessness to help us understand what's working in the system and what isn't working in the system. So we'll continue to explore this throughout what Red Deer did to revise our governance model. So as you may have noticed in the past couple of years, housing is certainly a national dialogue, and for Red Deer that's no different. Housing conversations have been fulsome and plentiful. The city got to have robust conversations with our community, though, in 2019 through the Community Housing and Homelessness Integrated Plan. This included one of the singular best responses on a community survey that the city has ever had. We had 23 unique 1-hour design labs that were topic-specific discussions talking about the broad continuum of housing and understanding how it impacted different groups. So we had a broad understanding. And we also had 13 1-hour sessions with individuals with lived experience across the housing spectrum. So the ad hoc committee created the report, they brought it forward to council, and council spent some time looking internally at its own governance structures related to housing. But as you're likely aware, ensuring integration across the full housing spectrum takes significant collaboration amongst stakeholders. So one of the things that we looked at initially was the idea of consolidation, that if we consolidated different elements across the housing spectrum, it might be easier to control kind of what happens across that housing continuum. However, we heard loud and clear from our community that consolidation isn't the sole path to integration. And we decided that we needed to be innovative, we had to honor the voices of our community that invested in us, and we had to stay focused on our goals that we needed to continue to drive healthier economic and safety realities in Red Deer. Oh, I missed one piece. The other element that came into play for Alberta was that the government of Alberta also launched their new affordable housing strategy. And that also gave us an opportunity with council to explore not only municipal goals, but provincial goals as well, and how did we align the two? And we tried to take advantage of better integration opportunities across the affordable housing end of the spectrum by aligning those provincial and municipal goals. Okay, so the 4 areas we initially started looking at were housing supports, governance, affordable housing inventory, and fund administration. So we zoned in on each of these areas and tried to look at the role that the city may play relative to those. And initially, you'll note that we had governance as its own piece of the pie. But what we ultimately were led to understanding was that governance played a role in all aspects and was kind of overarching in this puzzle. So this evolution of the understanding, along with other key learnings and changes, challenged us to take what we knew and try to find a Red Deer solution that met our council's wishes and honored the community's expectations. So this slide's a bit of a mess, but it helps us understand the various organizations that were providing housing governance in Red Deer. The first is the Housing Continuum of Care, represented by the familiar housing bar across the top of the slide. So we go everywhere from unsheltered to housing subsidization, and we looked at who plays a governance role in our community. Next are all the circles and ovals representing the many voices in Red Deer contributing to our housing solutions. Formerly, these organizations were operating in a cooperative model. While there was some familiarity that each other existed, there was often little in the way of communication or joint responsibility. So to facilitate a more collaborative model of housing governance, the City of Red Deer supported City of Red Deer's council supported administration to move forward with a series of recommendations. The work still gets done, but the picture looks cleaner, is more organized, and where we could, we've integrated governance to collaborative models in support of what is best for those housing support systems. So one of the first things that we did was that council approved the new Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee of Council that you'll see in the middle of this slide. The new integrated board is designed to and appointed by City Council and was empowered to make full decision-making as to keep council out of the decision-making and funding administration authorities. This new governance table would be collaborative and would be targeted to be filled with professionals, relevant knowledge keepers, and build community commitment to a common goal. With the terms, we would recommend for also a subcommittee, similar to what council had as an audit committee, for fund adjudication as to ensure conflict of interest concerns were fully addressed. Second, under the new provincial housing strategy, the city asked to work with local housing management bodies to co-create a local needs assessment based on the new provincial standard, prioritize housing asset development, including permanent supportive and affordable housing options, and to create 3-year targets for new housing developments. The other piece I want to talk about here is the Indigenous CE bubble that you'll see on the screen. It's noteworthy that the City of Red Deer continues to support the community as the Indigenous community entity. However, this role is not assumed and can change at any point if deemed appropriate. Our intention with this committee structure is to remain flexible and to ensure systems complement one another and seamlessly support those who need it. We'll discuss the implementation of a self-determining Indigenous governance model that was tested this year later on in the presentation. So this comes directly from City Council's committee's bylaw. And certainly if you're interested in all the details, this is available on the City of Red Deer's website, where you can see the kind of full breadth and terms of reference for the council committee. So this really, really starts with the why around council committees. The previous Community Housing Advisory Board, thank you, for the City of Red Deer was just that, an advisory committee of council, and therefore they were making recommendations that needed to be ratified by City Council. With that being said, I often found council was struggling with this role. They often didn't have the level of content expertise or context in which the advisory board had in making its decision. And it was also a very time-consuming process. So one of the things we looked around was throughout COVID, we learned how important it was to be responsive, that we needed to look at what the community needs were and to respond quickly. However, with council playing that, or the previous advisory board making recommendations to council, sometimes it would take several months for those decisions to be ratified and for us as administration to have the ability to implement those changes. So what was put forward to the committee was an adopted community goal as its North Star, and then the decision-making authority around planning, research, evaluation, asset management, and funding discretion. The next thing we reviewed is what would or would not be a role of the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee. Fundamentally, the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee provides guidance about what Red Deer's homelessness support system should look like, what should be funded, and to help identify gaps and needs that exist in the community. They need to be mindful of the entire housing spectrum, including those who are unsheltered, and finding ways to incorporate service elements across this same housing spectrum. So certainly one of the most unique elements of the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee is its membership. So on this screen you'll see the makeup of the committee, and once a year council asks for volunteers for these and other council committees. We've seen a tremendous shift since implementing this model. While well-intentioned, council's previous Community Housing Advisory Board was largely made up of community volunteers. While they were well-intentioned, they often lacked the real-world experience and knowledge relative to the support systems that they were asked to design and implement. So council just had its operating meeting a couple weeks ago, and the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee was the most sought-after appointment on the council committees. And we also had applicants for all available spaces. I should note that appointees are on a 2-year term with those alternating, so 50% one year, 50% the next, so there's some continuity between the two. So what we've seen is that this has really led to a wealth of knowledge being represented around the table. And I want to highlight that early on we did have some challenges. There were individuals who didn't feel their voices were being heard, and others that felt their opinions were not being relayed respectfully. So this was a great opportunity for us to have meetings solely focused on intent and determining the operating standards for the group to which everyone could agree and, most importantly, hold themselves accountable to. And that was a really important dialogue. So with all of our council committees, they do have the opportunity to have subcommittees to do additional work that is tasked to them. However, specifically in our municipal committees bylaw, there is a requirement for a fund adjudication subcommittee. This fund adjudication subcommittee ensures that there are no conflicts of interest, as with the broader representation, we do have funded agencies providing their expertise around the table, and council wanted to ensure that there wouldn't be that conflict of interest. However, I will also note that council's committee members are also required to adhere to a conflict of interest policy that's for all council committees. To date, we have 3 different subcommittees, and I'll speak to the first 2 in latter slides, but the ad hoc committee that we've seen thus far was specifically tasked by City Council, asking HHIC to look at the issue around housing asset development, and more specifically what roles the municipality could play relative to developing additional affordable and permanent supportive housing types in Red Deer. So this is the additional membership piece of the terms of reference for the fund adjudication subcommittee. The 4 appointees shouldn't have a conflict regarding funding matters, and alternate appointees are available if a conflict is declared. The city's also been working extensively with local Indigenous groups to help design an Indigenous fund adjudication process. This was an area of former contention across our community, as the city used to employ a formal request for proposal process for procuring services. The process was deemed as inappropriate and found the divisive nature of the competitive process was damaging to relationships in the local Indigenous community. Following the guidance of Red Deer's Urban Aboriginal Voices Society, and specifically its housing domain, an alternate process was explored. This was a direct response to the recommendations made through CHIP for better self-determination, cultural competency, and understanding of Indigenous populations' unique needs. One of the coolest parts of this funding process was that it was fully designed and implemented by Red Deer's local Indigenous community. It was relayed that the local community was capable of determining an appropriate process and membership to make these decisions, and asked the city to simply play an administrative role. This was fully endorsed by the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee, and they provided an Indigenous Fund Adjudication Subcommittee full funding autonomy and the ability to allocate all provincial and federal funds intended to support Indigenous individuals experiencing homelessness. The process was incredibly collaborative, and I look forward to future iterations of this process. We just debriefed the first utilization of this process, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with a few suggested improvements. Overall, the process was complimented for its commitment to self-representation and having a membership that was 100% Indigenous. It was commented that this was a considerable act of reconciliation, and that it was appreciated that the city was able to truly relinquish its control of that funding to an appropriate decision-making body, while being willing to follow through on the contract management and administrative sides of the process. So with both of the fund adjudication committees, once a budget is assigned to that committee to make funding determinations on, their decision is final. So we also have different types of community grants that both of the fund adjudication subcommittees have responsibility for. The three streams of grants you'll see on the screen were recently approved by City Council to provide continuity across all granting streams across the city. The first is representative of short-term grants that are meant to respond to arising community needs that need quick responses. For the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee, they have their Innovations in Housing Engagement Fund. This granting stream provides up to $50,000 in one-time grants for projects that respond to priorities identified in the Community Housing and Homelessness Integrated Plan. The second box are our strategic investments, which are procured through a recurrent request for proposal process, or those established by the Indigenous Fund Adjudication Subcommittee. And these are multi-year funding agreements that balance the need, the community's need with funding assurances for agencies. And then the third are long-standing agreements. In Red Deer, these include a permanent supportive housing site, an operating agreement that could only be provided to one organization due to the unique agreement that they have with a landlord. And another example for Red Deer is our shelter diversion programs. As the province selects shelter operators, we provide funding directly to those shelter operators to do shelter diversion work. Another unique element of the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee is its decision-making process. So instead of using the municipal standards of majority rule, Red Deer employed a consensus decision-making model for housing since the original 10-year plan to end homelessness back in 2008. This recommendation came from Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers and has been in place ever since. While it seems extremely daunting to seek consensus of a committee comprised of 14 individuals, it's been a remarkably positive experience. And in the last 5 years, I've never seen a motion fail to move forward. Instead, we've had robust and thorough, even exhaustive processes that have come to appropriate revisions to the motion on the floor. There's also a dissenting option where if someone can choose to step aside from a vote if they don't want to block the process from moving forward, but fundamentally they can't agree to what's being put forward. In 2001, the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee released a request for proposals for a service provider to help us create a lived and living experience group. The Canadian Mental Health Association was selected in Central Alberta and worked with various service providers across the housing continuum to highlight the opportunity for folks with lived and living experience to participate. So this group was originally provided funding, and they were always designed to be to self-determine their own priorities. So that initially the only real outcome that we were seeking out of the first couple of years of this group was to create a bit of a terms of reference and an understanding of how this body would work with one another, and they certainly did that. However, as a reporting element, they discussed amongst themselves how they were going to, or what medium they were going to use to share with the community some of their own findings and learnings. Ultimately, they created a great video called "Why Don't You See Me? The True Face of Homelessness." And one cool element is they've been doing local screenings. And so they've designed this to be educational and to drive the conversation about the importance of housing and homelessness work in our community, and also to dispel myths. A decision that they opted to make was that they weren't going to post this video online. They wanted this to be in-person screenings, and they have been attending. The Lived Experience Council members attend each session, host a Q&A session, and drive the community dialogue and dispel myths around homelessness in our community, which has been really awesome. One of the other things that they identified is that they wanted to meet with the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee, who were their funders. And we had a joint meeting between the council and the committee, and it was a great meeting. And ultimately, the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee asked for the Lived Experience Council to be added as a community resource to the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee meetings. And they've asked us as administration to take forward a revision to the council's committee's bylaw so that one of the co-chairs can be an active voting member as a part of the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee as well. So, in summary, what have we learned about this new integrated housing model, and why do we think it's important to share what we've learned? I think one of the initial things is that membership. And we really learned this back from the ad hoc committee of the Community Housing and Homelessness Integrated Plan. We saw the value in diverse opinions and perspectives being brought to the table. We appreciated the knowledge and insight that shelter providers and homelessness support service providers were bringing to the table and helping educate everyone around the table to make the wisest decisions. And I think this is really the richness of what we've moved forward with. In addition, we've also looked at how do we better integrate those other public systems. So I talked about how, in reality, the majority of those funding are going to those other government-funded systems. And so we've been able to bring in elements of our justice system, elements of our health system around the table. And in recent years, AHS is really our health partner, Alberta Health Services. They've really moved forward to seeing where else they can be involved in the system. So how do they get involved in the coordinated access system, have different teams at that table, and how do they contribute more broadly to the issue of homelessness supports. We've also found better alignment with other systems across the housing continuum. So I think of some of the recent products have included shelter diversion programs, having shelters at the table, but also inviting other shelter service providers in to talk about what needs they have, but also what role can they play? What could they do differently to look at the role of shelters relative to the self-resolution of an individual's homelessness, for example. On the other end, we've talked to our housing management bodies. And one of the issues that they brought forward to the table is they said, you know, we're kind of the last effort. And if someone isn't successful in their supported housing efforts, their exit is often to homelessness. But at the same time, we don't have the funding or the opportunity to support those individuals as we aren't funded for social support. So we talked the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee worked with them to create a bit of a program around so that they could have on-site social supports that would work with individuals that were struggling with maintaining their housing in that program as well. I'd argue that one of the best governance models strive to represent the varied voices and opinions that exist in community, and that's certainly what we've seen. And the other important piece has been not being afraid to have the hard conversations. There are going to be disagreements, and working through those, and I think utilizing the consensus model has been really critical to helping us understand, why is someone concerned about going in a certain direction? Why is that approach not sitting right with someone? And are there potential changes or resolutions we could make to move forward in a better way? Certainly, our Lived Experience Council has been an immense source of knowledge for this table, and they regularly speak about how much they appreciate having them at the table. And most importantly, finally, we've really added an efficiency to our processes. We aren't waiting several months to get to community resolutions and options. We're able to make quick decisions, and this process has also ensured that we can involve people with content knowledge and expertise without having a conflict of interest at the same time. So that's it for me.
All right, thanks very much, Ryan. We are now at the Q&A portion, so I would invite folks, if you have a question, throw up your hand. I don't think we have a wireless mic.
No, that's the only one here.
Okay, so we do have a wired mic, so if you happen to be situated near it and it's easy to get to, we would invite you to use the microphone. Otherwise, if you can't, we'll just ask you folks to repeat the question or include it in your response in the mic, just so that folks can hear the question after the recording. So we have a question.
A question to Red Deer. I'm just curious about effects on other funders. So if you had like your United Ways, your community foundations, your corporate funders, if that committee has had the opportunity to influence some of the decision making with respect to the organizations based on yours.
Yeah. So we've certainly had some conversations. We historically have had something called a funders forum in Red Deer, where those funders are talking with one another. I do think there's still more opportunities to discuss those matters further. In particular, I've had recent conversations with the Community Foundation, for example, that does have an interest in looking at how we work more closely and understanding each other's funding priorities. In particular, for our area, our funding priorities are pretty established through Reaching Home and the Outreach and Support Services Initiatives grants, but there is opportunities for areas where the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee, maybe they have areas that they can't fund and that they would be interested in, that they could relay some of that to additional funding partners. So yeah, definitely a great question.
Yeah, in the back.
Yes. So ETO is efforts to outcomes. So that's the acronym, and that our ETO system is Homer Trust system, but there's different versions. So there is actually I think it's a coincidence. Coincidentally, the Edmonton shelters use ETO a separate instance of ETO to manage their occupancy data. So there's I guess there's a few different levels. Shelter occupancy data is also provincially mandated. So there's a stream of reporting that goes to the province from the shelters, but also each shelter has a housing team that we fund, and so they use our ETO for that. So it's a little, I guess they're all related.
Okay, another one right at the very back.
Hello, wondering if Red Deer could share a little bit about the dynamic
Certainly. So the City of Red Deer is the community-based organization, which means that we're an appointee for the province. We're provided dedicated funding for the Outreach and Support Services Initiative, which we then, at a local level, help distribute that funding to areas where we determine there's a local need. And what is beneficial about this housing and homelessness integration model is that we're looking at both our federal funding as well as the provincial funding, as well as, is there an opportunity for municipal or other funders to be involved in kind of a joint approach and funding things across the spectrum. However, there are challenges, and this is one of the things of why we moved in this direction. So shelters, for example, are funded directly by the province. Our housing management bodies responsible for affordable housing are also funded directly from the province. And that was really where the need came for this integrated model of all these parts of the housing continuum aren't talking to one another, aren't working with one another, and how do we get them around the same table and starting to talk about where the interplay is between our work and how we work with one another.
Okay, in the gray.
This one's for Jackie. I'm just wondering what the role of qualitative data is in your system, if any.
It's important. I think the qualitative data, so I guess I'll preface this with, I joined Homer Trust in just about a year and a half ago, and my entire time in Edmonton has been during COVID. So I guess my firsthand experience of the qualitative evaluation is lessened. I know that Homer Trust traditionally has, as part of the annual program review cycle, we'll use participant reviews. The quality of people's housing experiences are a factor in program assessments. We have a very robust, I don't want to say complaints line, but a remediation system for successes in housing first. So the quality to make sure that the teams our funded programs are doing what they are. Is that about the, sorry, is that the right, is that what you mean by qualitative, or is there?
In parts, like that's qualitative related to programming. Do you use any other kinds of qualitative data in understanding the context of the quantitative data that you're getting? So when you're looking at things like resuscitations or things that are happening within the shelter that may not necessarily come through a strict program review, is there any other use of qualitative data that you're bringing in to create context for the dashboards that you're using? Yeah,
that's sorry, I guess just to repeat, so the question relates to are we using qualitative data within, I guess, to understand the dashboards better and the results of the data. So I think we're working on that. I think we're working through not exactly privacy restrictions, but just where the information comes from, the validity of it, and how we can actually rationalize it. So for example, again, coming from a health background, health data is relatively restricted in its ability to be shared, but I would also add that health-related information, so on things like resuscitations, it also requires, I guess, expertise to interpret. So the assessments and what we learn from assessments, before using it in a dashboard or to use it to interpret a dashboard, I think there's some work to validate what we know and the tools that we're using. So I think that the answer to that is that it's in development, but it's important. I mean, certainly the reason to do these dashboards and understand the entire state of our system is to add, that subjectivity to it. That's not just just broad numbers. So it's a great avenue to explore, and it's one that we'll work on, for sure.
Thanks. We have one at the mic and then one right in front.
Hi, thanks, Jackie and Ryan, for your presentations. They were great. This question is directed at both of you, really. Do you find your approaches have helped to improve political, NIMBYist, or other narratives about homelessness? And if so, do you have any ways of measuring that? And if there's time, Ryan, I know you mentioned you had 23 design sessions about various things. I'd be curious to hear more about that.
Okay, we'll lead with the design labs piece. So that was built into the design of the Community Housing and Homelessness Integrated Plan. Turner Strategies helped us with that as well. So we had, we looked at the different topics across the housing continuum and areas of interest. So multiple sessions on Indigenous homelessness, session on youth and homelessness, seniors and homelessness. I think my insight, having done it, is we reached saturation point pretty early. I think maybe 6 or 8 design labs in, we were hearing the same thing over and over again. So that is maybe something to note. However, what I appreciated is when I saw the final report and the ad hoc committee had approved the final report, I felt very strongly that it came from our community and it was representative of our community's voice, because we had heard them so many times, so loud and clear about what needed to be included in that plan moving forward. So it was very valuable. I appreciated that. In terms of the process and the aspects around the political nature, from a NIMBY perspective, I'm not sure it's made massive inroads there. I think from an understanding, what I can see is, you may have noticed in our membership, we do have 2 city council members that sit at that Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee. I feel like we often see them talking up in council, for example, about what they're hearing around that table, and that, you know, they're taking into account feedback that they're hearing from service providers, that they're hearing from individuals with lived experience, and they're able to relay that to their counterparts at a council level. However, yeah, it continues to be a challenge for sure.
The NIMBYism perspective is interesting, and it's one that I think in Edmonton, you know, like our shared responsibility, I guess, with the city of Edmonton. The city of Edmonton's been much more involved in the area of homelessness over the last few years, due to, I suppose, it's a shifting of politics, different people in council. But the city of Edmonton is much more involved now than they ever were, and the engagement of the public, it shifts, I suppose, in that. What would be broadly discussed as social disorder is predominantly on the public's minds, right? The quality and the quantity of housing solutions is not typically, and it would be, I guess, to use the sort of a health comparison, nobody cares about emergency room wait times more than the person actually waiting for it, right? The quality of it is not the quality of kind of what we do. And all of that is sometimes second to what's being seen. So, you know, we're starting engagement right now on an updated community plan and homelessness. Like that will be a major push to engage the public. We'll expect to see, you know, that same. Not that same. We'll expect to see, I think, some element of NIMBYism, and I guess our approach. Hopefully will be centered around providing like positive solutions, positive outcomes. Like we can't speak to, I think, all concerns. We certainly have no, we lack the ability to address every single person's concerns on every level. What we do is, you know, we'll try to provide an understanding of like, this is the path out of homelessness. This is the state of homelessness as we understand it, and, you know, these solutions that hopefully the public can get behind.
Jackie, the ETO, is there a particular reason you guys went with that design engine as a fee structure software rather than utilizing HIFIS? Did you find, like, if you're aware of HIFIS, was it not suitable? Was it not powerful enough for?
Yeah, so the question is why ETO and why not HIFIS or another alternative, I suppose. I don't know, because that was well before my time at. Ryan's gonna bail me out.
As a joint colleague at 7 Cities, Alberta. So Alberta had a 10-year plan to end homelessness that far predates HIFIS. And so as a part of that provincial strategy, ETO was employed to help measure the outcome of the system as a whole. And so it was more of a grandfathering in. So when HIFIS came about, all of the 7 cities in Alberta were already mandated provincially to use ETO. And so we continue to use that system on a grandfathered state. You'll note in your reaching home agreements, it does have a clause for that. And so that's why Alberta continues to use ETO. However, we also continue to look at what the future may entail.
It's a good job, friends.
So it is fee structured though, right? Like it is, it's, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Right at the back.
Ryan, I love the composition or the scope of the committee. Can you speak a little bit to the frequency of how you gather and what maybe that eliminated as far as other standing committees and sort of paint that picture of like what else is happening this week?
Sure. So the question was around how often does the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee meet? What is its, has it replaced other meetings? So it is a standing meeting for the Committee of the Whole. So they meet on I think it's the 4th Tuesday of every month or something like that. The ad hoc committees meet as needed. So if there's so a funding allocation made from the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee and a funding decision needs to be made, then it goes to the ad hoc committees. They meet as required, so they may meet one time to help us design the request for proposal or something like that, and then they'll meet as needed to adjudicate it, come to a decision, et cetera. In terms of what it's eliminated, I think the biggest from a time perspective has been the number of times that decisions have to be in front of City Council, because previously Council needed, as it was a advisory board, every decision had to go to City Council. So I know personally, being the administrative person that took those forward, that was hours and hours and hours of my time in front of, or in City Council chambers while these were presented. And very few times, I don't think I ever saw a single time where council didn't follow the advice of the advisory council regardless.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I took a picture of, I think, every single slide, so I'll just find the actual presentation of yours, Ryan. But I'm wondering, we're building our governance structure right now, and one of the things we're struggling with is how that relationship with council in Ottawa, there's specifically a type of committee called an advisory committee that's council's reviewed. And I think the hurdle we're experiencing is how do you have actual teeth? How can it be taken seriously? And the other piece around that is the tension where the city's, sense of we can't have you guys make every decision. We have things we have to make decisions about, and I think there's a lot of trust building that we're doing. But that tension of what does the HHIC really guide, and then what are the things that are kind of allocated to yes, council and the city have to act, and then also how do you make it accountable? And it sounds like you've really done that effectively.
Yeah, trying to repeat that question. For the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee, what decisions does it make? How do you ensure it has teeth? That all came through the council committee's bylaw. So through the committee bylaw itself, it's explicit in what is the responsibility of that committee, including in their terms of reference. So there are still housing and homelessness matters that go to City Council, and I think of, council asking the Housing and Homelessness Integration Committee to look at housing asset development, for example, saying, we understand we as the city have a role to play in ensuring we make steps towards, if it's zoning or around development permits, the city has a role to play, but the expertise lies here. So we're going to task you with this work and ask you to bring us something back so that we can contemplate that. So it's really been the interplay between the two that I think is really critical, that yes, they have an assigned body of work. So I would say their primary body of work is as a funder for the funds that are assigned through Reaching Home and Outreach and Support Services Initiative from the feds and the province. and saying that's your primary responsibility, but we want you to take that into consideration across the full housing spectrum. Consider that as an element of working with housing management bodies. Consider that as working with your shelter operators. So that's, I hope that answers your question.
That's super helpful. I'm going to talk to you after.
Any more questions? Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
A question I had was, you talked about, Ryan, switching over from volunteers providing advice for governance to choosing experts. Surrounding the selection of experts and recruitment of experts, I was wondering, what were those processes? How did you decide what kind of expertise were needed? Because a lot of different people would come up with different agendas, like from real estate communities, people with psychology backgrounds, social services. So I was just wondering what informed that process and what recruitment strategies did you potentially use to fill those roles?
That's a great question. So as a whole, we follow council's committee's bylaw process, which includes, council has a separate committee that appoints community members to the different committees. So it is a broad application process, and you'll actually find the application on our website as well, where we ask for which seats you, and it could be multiple seats, you're applying for, what skill set you have, what your background is, why are you interested in this, and some really targeted questions around understanding or helping council understand that individual's level of expertise and why they would be a good fit for that placement. Ultimately, it's council's decision for appointing those members. Generally, though, having the different members and membership types has helped us narrow in on the types of expertise that we're looking for around the table. We have also employed some targeted recruitment pieces around, like we would broadly send out the application process to all of our funded service providers, letting them know that, we're looking for one of our funded service providers to fill a seat at this table. So for the business community, we would send that out to the Downtown Business Association, to the Chamber of Commerce. So we do look for targeted areas where we can try to make sure people are aware of the opportunity, and then council makes the decision on those appointments.
Hello, my name is Kyle Rollinson. I'm from the city of Red Deer, so I want to thank Ryan. There was another data presentation going on this morning, and he's like, "You got to come check this one out." So my question is not for Ryan, it's for Jackie. One of the things, I just want to paint the visualization of the slide that was up that you had, Jackie. It was about the current data ecosystem, and along the top there was database, Excel, and basically the whole extraction and transformation and loading process. One of the things that I noticed, and I want to thank you and your team for, is you've helped us integrate the use of SPSS as a transformation tool for our data. But then a couple slides later, you moved on to Python. And so that's one of the things that we've started looking at as well. And I always run into this with just different areas where there's a duplication of work going on and we want to collaborate and not reinvent the wheel. So recognizing that you are moving to sort of a new Python model or a transformation model, what successes or why did you go down that path? That's my first question. And then my second question is, with that data, as you see it go from the left to the right, our previous model included just one person doing all of those sort of roles. You could see that balancing that could be challenging. So I'm also curious about your organization's sort of organizational structure and how, if there is any black and white lines between that process.
It's like we planted that question. So it's good. Right. So the transition, and again, I am not the data person. I guess I have accountability to it, but the in-depth understanding is not mine. The transition from SPSS to Python had a lot related to do with that workflow and the dependency and frankly the blocker of having a very limited number of staff with expertise in SPSS, and Python being a more broadly utilized system. That was the main motivation. It was too dependent. The process we had in the past was too dependent on just a few people. And SPSS is it's a tool that I remember when I was in school. And it's one that my wife used it as a research assistant in 2003. I was not aware that it was outdated and that people, in fact, like, I didn't realize until we tried to recruit that it was actually a hindrance to building out our data team. So the current structure is that we're not dependent on that one person, and we've got 3 to 4 people now who are versed in Python, and the ongoing sustainability of that work is, I guess that was the main driver. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Cool. You left the mic, so I guess it has to.
All right, we are just about at time, so I just want to thank our presenters both again for 2 really excellent presentations.